Is it aliens or office supplies?
The desperate attempt to somehow link me to aliens, an Elvis comeback album, a two-nosed Osama, and Area 51 is nothing more than another example of how ridicule and condescension are utilized in a last-ditch effort to somehow draw attention away from evidence and information that is damning to the conventional wisdom of the official story. Now, many of the Glenn Beck listeners may have bought into this ploy, but to those with the ability to recognize it, it was nothing more than an assault on the evidence and information and an insult to the families who lost loved ones on September 11th. Jamie McIntyre appeared on Anderson Cooper's 360 program in what appeared to be a damage control interview. Obviously, he was responding to our news release and my appearance on the Glenn Beck Show. He was claiming that statements he made in his report on September 11th were taken out of context.
The websites often take statements out of context, such as this exchange from CNN, in which I, myself, appear to be questioning whether a plane really hit the building.
From my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
In fact, I was talking about an eyewitness who thought the plane landed short of the Pentagon, and went on to say the only crash site was at the Pentagon.
The only site is the actual site of the building that's crashed in, and that's...
In fact, there were thousands of tiny pieces of the plane, and I personally photographed a piece of the fuselage and what appeared to be part of the cockpit.
And now let's listen to Jamie McIntyre's live report again on September 11th.
From my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual site of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around.
It appears that the only person taking Jamie McIntyre's statements out of context is Jamie McIntyre.
And I think we need to make explicitly clear who she is embracing. There are only two websites that deal with 9/11 that she has linked to on her own blog. One of them is called W.T.C. 7, and the other one is the Scholars for 9/11 Truth. These are the worst, most fringe, kookiest, discredited academic crackpots who believe that the Secret Service and the CIA planted a controlled demolition of that building. And if Rosie really wants to have an honest discussion and debate, I dare her, I dare Barbara Walters, I dare ABC to put on the editors of Popular Mechanics to set the people straight about what exactly happened.
Popular Mechanics magazine published this article in their March 2005 edition. It was entitled, Debunking the Myths of 9/11. And in regard to what they reported at the Pentagon, they stated, when American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon's exterior wall, Ring E, it created a hole approximately 75 feet wide, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers Pentagon Building Performance Report. The exterior facade collapsed about 20 minutes after impact, but ASCE based its measurements of the original hole on the number of first-floor support columns that were destroyed or damaged. Let's back up. The article states, when American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon's exterior wall, Ring E, it created a hole approximately 75 feet wide. But according to the photographs and the video footage taken before the collapse of the outer ring, it's clear to see that the hole certainly was not 75 feet wide. It was the collapse itself that created the 75-foot wide hole, according to the photographs and video footage that was shot before the collapse of the outer ring. And yet the Popular Mechanics magazine doesn't mention the collapse as occurring until 20 minutes after impact. So how can it be both ways? Either Flight 77 hit the Pentagon and created a 75-foot wide hole, or it didn't. The photographs and video footage clearly show that there was no 75-foot wide hole and that the collapse itself created the hole that they're referring to. This type of reporting is disingenuous and misleading, to say the least. And at this point in time, James Meigs, the editor of Popular Mechanics magazine, has refused to debate or discuss this issue. One of the most controversial and divisive issues in regard to the quest for truth about what happened on September 11th is the issue as to whether or not there was any extra equipment attached to the belly of the plane that was reported to have been Flight 175. The Popular Mechanics magazine of March 2005 quoted their expert, Ronald Greeley. He was the director of the Space Photography Laboratory at Arizona State University and is an expert at analyzing images to determine the shape and features of geological formations based on shadow and light effects. Greeley dismissed the notion that there was a photo that revealed a pod. In fact, according to Popular Mechanics magazine, the photo reveals only the Boeing's right fairing, a pronounced bulge that contains the landing gear. Greeley concluded that sunlight glistening off the fairing gave it an exaggerated look. However, on the Art Bell show, Ben Chertoff, who was the science researcher for Popular Mechanics, was interviewed.
If you actually watch the footage in full motion, you can see most of it is just the shadow from the engine as it's flying into the building. But when you see it on the video, there's this enlargement effect that happens from the video, and that has turned into this pod.
Question: how could the pod have been created by sunlight, according to Ronald Greeley, and shadow, according to Ben Chertoff, at the same time?
The most valuable commodity to a newsman is his credibility. And I don't take lightly investigating what happened on 9/11 because it could end up being one of the biggest crimes ever perpetrated in American history.
We've seen several examples of how the media has massaged, manipulated, and created stories to mislead the American people and the people of the world. The BBC reporting 25 minutes before it happened that Building 7 had collapsed. This despite the fact that never in history had a steel structure collapsed as a result of a fire. And yet they reported it before it happened. How did they know? We've seen Jamie McIntyre reverse his own testimony that he gave on September 11th, claiming that those reporting had taken his words out of context. We've seen Glenn Beck utilizing propaganda techniques in an attempt to discredit and ridicule and negate real information. We've seen ABC TV in New York City interviewing William Rodriguez on September 11th of 2006, where they took his testimony where he described the explosion below him and made it sound as though he was describing the explosion of the plane hitting above. Ever since September 11th, talk show hosts on radio and television have discussed these events, some supportive and some challenging the official story. There are those, however, that utilize what some call thug journalism, a technique of talking over, ridiculing, discrediting, and insulting the guest in an attempt to make them look silly. Let's take a look at an example of thug journalism at work. In this example, Bill O'Reilly on The O'Reilly Factor was interviewing Professor James Fetzer, who challenges the official story. We timed this interview, and in this 6-minute and 20-second television piece, Mr. O'Reilly talked for 5 minutes and 1 second, where the guest, Professor Fetzer, only spoke for 1 minute and 17 seconds. The concept of host versus guest seems to have escaped Mr. O'Reilly. In real journalism, a host will ask a question, and the guest is allowed to respond. At that point, the host can engage the guest in a conversation and a debate of the issues. This was certainly not the case in this interview with Professor Fetzer.
You're like the guys who think that the space aliens kidnapped Elvis or something like that. That's where you are. You're nuts. We're both entitled to our opinion, okay? So you're entitled and I'm entitled. And we'll let the folks decide. Well, hold it. You hate your country.
The American government.
Look, you hate your country. You're accusing a man of murder, the President of the United States, of murder without any evidence.
Bill, you're obviously not going to give me a chance to talk about any of these things.
No, I'm not, because you're a
go to
nut.
our website, st.
All right, we heard your website.
If you want the truth.
Fine.
Bill O'Reilly shouted over, interrupted, attacked, ridiculed, and insulted Professor Fetzer at every opportunity in an attempt to take away any credibility that Professor Fetzer may have had. This is not journalism, but it has, however, become standard operating procedure on many talk shows. Those that do have evidence and information that challenge the official story are very rarely allowed to present that information. There has to date been no open and honest discussion and presentation of evidence and information